Welcome to the Spark It podcast, where we explore stories, experiences, and insights that spark a fire within so you can make your next big move. In this episode, we turn our attention to Uganda, a nation standing at a critical political crossroad. President Yoweri Museveni has ruled for nearly 4 decades, shaping the country's destiny since 1986. As Uganda approaches another election, questions around leadership, democracy, and the people will loom large. Has Museveni delivered on his promises to the people? And what does democracy mean when one leader has been in power for so long? And what will it take for Uganda to experience true political transition? Today, we explore Uganda's political reality through the lenses of leadership, democracy, constitutionalism, rule of law, and the need for change. And I am joined by Patrick, my co-host at the Sparkit podcast, and our in-house political analyst, Emmanuel Taban from the Concerned podcast. Welcome, guys. How are you feeling today?
Feeling
Very
great.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, Emmanuel, you can let us know how your day has been, and then we can get to Patrick.
Yeah, my day has been great. Just sad to have received the news about the death of Kenya former Prime Minister, which is going on right now all over social media. And yeah, but apart from that, my day is good.
Nice. Patrick?
My day has been well. Except for when I came also across the news of the death of Raila Amolo Odinga, which is so sad and unfortunate. But I think apart from that, I'm good. Yeah, super
Nice.
energized for today.
Wow, that's good. Thanks, guys, for making time to have this conversation. I know Uganda holds like such a big space for you guys. In the context of you've been to Uganda, you've lived in Uganda. Uganda has been like your second home apart from South Sudan. And today we are going to be focusing on the political landscape of Uganda. Museveni's rule and what that has meant for Ugandans and even South Sudanese nationals over the last maybe 4 decades. So, after nearly 4 decades in power, how would you describe President Museveni's leadership? Has it evolved with Uganda's changing needs, or has it remained rooted in old political systems? Maybe we could get started with you, Patrick.
Thank you very much. Maybe even like before responding to this question in particular, something to underscore is that before Museveni came into power in 1986, Uganda as a country has been in chaos for a very long time, whether it being under the leadership, the brutal regime of Idi Amin Dada, who really brutalized a lot of people and caused a lot of havoc in the country, to the leadership of many others like Obote and others. So the previous years have been years of chaos and turmoil in Uganda, and so many communities were basically facing very devastating conditions across the country. And also that story goes back to, when Uganda was under the colonial regime of the British. And so like these were all the conditions that were already in existence when Museveni came in 1986. And so I think he came promising stability of the country. And I think since he took over office, one could say that he has, maybe that is one of his biggest success. He has delivered on that promise, at least for the most part that he's been in power. I think the country has been relatively stable and in peace for all these years. Um, but also, when it comes now to your question in particular, I think one would say that Museveni's leadership has been one that is really mixed. When you look and assess his leadership style, because you can see that with this promise of delivering peace and stability for the country after all this chaos that the country has been through, it has evolved over time to a focus more on security first politics. And even when it comes to budgeting, the focus became more on security as like the priority, um, along other areas. But I think security has taken like such an important priority when it comes to his leadership and stuff like that. And I would think that that is probably one of the biggest thing when it comes to his leadership style is a mix of security but also very centralized systems, maybe control of so many stuff in the country and how they happen. But I think apart from that, I would say it's been so much focused on basically keeping the country stable over the years. But I would also even say that his style of leadership is either one that he has mimicked from other leaders within the region or maybe Africa, or that other leaders within the region or Africa have mimicked. Uh, when you look at the focus on security as a priority, I think you'll even notice that across so many African countries, security is almost one of those things that when it comes to the national budget processes, they invest in heavily almost every year and consistently. And so, but also there are some people I think over the years that have said that his leadership style have evolved to include basically, I would say, a centralization of power within the presidency or maybe security services, focused more on securing the president and maybe keeping the president in power for all these years. But I think that is debatable because, again, elections happen, as we'll discuss maybe more later. And it's definitely one of those things that is debatable. But I think his leadership has definitely been a mix of security first politics and a focus more on stability of the country.
Interesting take. And Emmanuel,
Good. I agree with most of what Patrick said. That over the years, Museveni's leadership has been built mostly on stabilizing the country. And when we look at the region right now, and you'd see that from 1986, the only country in the eastern parts of Africa that perhaps has been having a kind of stable peace is Uganda. When we look at Kenya, as so many people refer to it as a democratic state compared to so many East African countries, but in 2007, Kenya was almost getting into a state of going into an abyss after the post-election violence that happened in 2007 took the country. I mean, it costed the country. So many people lost lives. South Sudan has experienced several civil wars. Rwanda in 1994 had the genocide. Somalia has never been stable. Congo in the eastern part is never stable. Sudan is not stable. Even Burundi and Djibouti. I mean, you could easily see that it is Uganda in the eastern parts of Africa that has at least has a quite some kind of stability. And that clearly tells us, and that becomes one of his biggest contributions, not only in Uganda but in the entire region, and that made Uganda to be one of the safest places in the eastern region that most of other people from those countries that have been experiencing civil war run to. In I mean, for safety, you've seen it. There's so many Somali people in Uganda. There's South Sudanese. There are Sudanese, Congolese that are being hosted by Uganda simply because Uganda has been stable. And that clearly tells us the level of stability that Uganda has attained over the years. So, but also, there are so many people who believe that, of course, one of the prerequisites for a country um, to I mean get to another level is security. But so many Ugandans, as Patrick has said, that his leadership has been received with so many mixed feelings. There are so many other Ugandans who believe that, you know, uh, whereas we praise him for bringing the stability, but we feel that Uganda deserves more than just security, right? We need other things, probably. People asking questions, even when the country has peace. But what is that more important than peace? Are people given the rights to maybe call out the government? Do we have some of these democratic principles respected? Do we give people the freedom of speech, say whatever they want to say about the government or the policies that are being done by the government? Do we have elections conducted in the most free and fair manner? So when we look at all these and we compare with the kind of stability that President Museveni has delivered, I think that leaves people with so many mixed feelings. So many people might praise him for the stability he created, but others feels that he's not doing so much in making the country, I mean, like giving people the freedom to speak up their minds. uh, we have seen in the last previous elections that almost the opposition has been, I mean, start up most of the times, when the country is heading towards an election. uh, Members of the opposition have been targeted, brutalized, and some of them jailed. Like from the previous election, there are people who are still in jail just because they were supporting the opposition. They've been in jail like for the last 4 years or so. So his leadership has been received with so many mixed feelings. Others look at him as being a leader who is able to deliver stability in the region, but others look at him as a dictator. And just like Patrick has said, that he seems to have centralized power within the presidency. And you could easily see that he is the president of the country. His son is the CDF, the Chief of Defense Forces, in charge of all the air force, the army, and probably the navy and all this. So the wife is a minister of education, so you could see that uh, the kind of mixed feelings people have towards his leadership. But all in all, I would say that he has really, really delivered so much. Uh, I would also say that Uganda is one of the countries in East Africa that is affordable to live in right now. So that speaks so much about the economy as well. So the country might not be where the citizen expects to be, but I think at the moment we need really to credit Museveni for doing so. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you guys have given like a good background to where Uganda was, where it is, and potentially where it could be in the future. And the one thing I picked from what the both of you talked about was the sort of stability that Uganda has experienced in the long term. But my question remains, for example, yeah, Museveni has been in power from 1986. How can Ugandans prove that this stability that they have experienced for that long time would continue in his absence? For example, does his leadership to some extent feel a bit maybe dictatorial, or is it like democratic? And now that even takes us to like the next question: do you believe that Uganda is a true democracy, or a state where democratic process exists just in name? Patrick?
Uh, I think I would say, um, I mean, based on the kind of elections that we've seen happening in the country on a schedule and regularly, I think one would say Uganda is a democracy and has been for some time now. Uh, Maybe when it comes to, say, the playing field for different contenders that might be running for an office maybe within the country, that is something debatable, given that I think over the years we've seen cases of political opposition being repressed and maybe arrested and jailed and stuff like that. But I think apart from that, I think Uganda is democratic because, again, things like, for example, democracy, I feel like it's very contextual, uh, because how democracy might look and work in Kenya might be different in how it does in maybe Uganda or maybe Rwanda or so forth. But I think uh, the key point to note is that about democracy, we are talking about the people having the power to decide who governs them, people having power to decide how they are governed and stuff like that. And so if you look at it from that perspective, which is what democracy is primarily about, I think one would say that Uganda is democratic and has been for some time. One might disagree with some of the things that have been happening and continue to happen that might not appear democratic, such as, for example, maybe the shrinking civil and political space, whether it being for civil society or other political actors and stuff like that. But I think generally we can all agree that Ugandans have been over the years had the power to be able to select who leads them as a country, or to be a part of the process of deciding how they are governed as a country.
Interesting.
Hmm.
And you, Emmanuel?
Yeah. I think uh, the question of whether Uganda is a democracy depends on how one understand what it mean, what democracy means. I mean, there is no any single country in the world that claims it observes all the principles of democracy, right? Even the United States of America, that so many people praises as the mother of democracy, no country in the world observes all principles of democracy. And some of the major principles of democracy that stands out, it's a periodic uh, elections that happens, just like Patrick has said. So if we do have elections coming after every 5 or 4 years, and if we have a space where other political parties are allowed to operate, if we have a space where people at some point are given the chance, they participate in elections in choosing the people they want to be their representatives, then we can say we do have a democracy in such a country. I mean, we can we can even look at the United States of America and their previous elections. There's so many claims about rigging that came out. People talked about rigging, and yet this is a country that many of other countries look up to when they're talking about democracy. And we see in the United States right now that there is weaponization of the justice system. I mean, there are so many things that are happening in those countries that so many people look up to as the beacons of democracy that are as well happening. So I think it would be better for us to say that Uganda is not maybe a democratic state. It would be a double standard when we say just because maybe there is a kind of certain principles that are not upheld in Uganda, and yet they are not also being observed in other countries, and then we say Uganda is not a democracy. I do believe that Uganda is a democracy because uh, for the last, uh, I mean, 2 decades, we had like almost 4 elections held. So, I mean, this is a good one. In other countries, we don't get to see this. They know, I mean, a leader runs for decades. I mean, he rules for decades, but he acquired that mandate through elections. And Uganda, and even right now, Kimaru, we are getting into I mean, a campaign moves in the country, and you could see just, I think, the last few days, Museveni had a campaign rally where he visited the northern part of the country, and you could easily see the crowd that he was able to pull out, and you can see that. I mean, this is an organic crowd, right? I mean, it's the people have the feeling that they still trust such a leader, and if these people still have a trust in this leader, and they are saying that we are going to vote, this means that we do have some of the democratic principles being observed in Uganda, and it wouldn't be a good idea to just dismiss that and say Uganda is maybe a dictatorial state simply because Museveni has been in power maybe for the last 4 decades. Yes, he is a president and he has been the president for the last maybe 3 or 4 decades, but it is Ugandans who decided that he has to be their president for the last 4 decades. So Uganda, I feel, as oh, it's a democracy.
Mhm.
Uh,
I hear what you guys have said, but from an outsider point of view, or even a more privileged point of view, as as a Kenyan who's experienced a different type of democracy, I was telling Emmanuel, and I did talk to Patrick's the other time when I went to Koboko for us to record the Spark It podcast episode. I met with this professor on the bus, and he realized I was Kenyan, and he was like, "Oh, you guys are very lucky because you have a particular democracy that we actually envy as Ugandans, and you have a lot of freedom of speech. You can express yourselves, you can protest, and stuff like that." Then he went on to tell me, Ugandans are cowards. That's what he said. He said that for them, under the rule of Museveni, they've not been able to sort of express themselves in such a way. And we talked about Ugandans being able to experience some level of democracy, but we can clearly see, as an outsider, I can clearly see, or I can say maybe from my own point of view, that there could be things that Ugandans are not able to experience because of maybe Museveni or the laws in Uganda and the constitutional changes that keep happening. So, in your own opinion, do you think like Ugandans revere Museveni in such a way, or do you think that them voting Museveni every election, does that reflect genuine support, fear of instability, or limited political alternatives? We could start with you, Emmanuel. What do you think?
um, I believe that so many Ugandans, they are used to the political stability that the country has, and they've also got experience of what instability means, especially from seeing the neighboring countries which have been experiencing lots of civil war, especially like South Sudan. They know the impact of a country not having that political instability. And I think a section of Ugandans who disagree with Museveni, most of them are really not uh, disagreeing with him, maybe because or they hate him because maybe he is a dictator or what. But I think most of them just feel that Museveni has stayed in power for quite long. I think that is the frustration. They just feel he has overstayed in power and they need change. But a section of Ugandans, they still do want him. And the question of whether their support for Museveni is genuine or not, I think uh, so many people, they are supporting him genuinely because they feel they all they need to have is just to have that political stability. And also there are people who uh, maybe support Museveni because of how the opposition has been portraying itself. Maybe, you know, there is a very popular observation from the African continent about leaders who were so much allied to the West. And when we look at the opposition right now, the opposition can be seen it through Bobi Wine right now, and so many people regard Bobi Wine to be as an imposter of the West. I mean, they look at him as a Western, someone who is being just imposed on Uganda by the Western countries. And Museveni has built his leadership on the African morals and the African cultures. I mean, he is this African leader who stands so much with all the ideals of Africans and the cultures and all these morals. And when they look at these two people, someone who they look at him as being imposed by the West, and someone who ideally stands with the beliefs of Africans, and they would see like, okay, maybe you would say that Museveni is not the I mean, it's not so perfect, but we are looking at someone that we don't know what he's going to bring in power when he becomes a president. We don't know what he's going to deliver. So I mean, and they might be thinking that it's better to have the devil you know than the angel you don't know, right? And therefore their support for Museveni is can actually be gotten from the fear of what Bob Wine or what the opposition will bring in should they take over power. So majority of them support Museveni not because he is perfect, not because maybe he is the good leader, but because they fear that maybe should they have a new leader, then they're not going to have a Uganda that they have been enjoying for all these decades. So I think that is the fear that is in the hearts of so many Ugandans right now who are pro Museveni, who supports Museveni. Their support might not be necessarily that Museveni is the best leader, is someone who can deliver, but they have the trust in him. For the last years, they have him as the president, and he has delivered the stability in the country. And they fear that when Bobi comes in, or when the opposition comes in, so they might take the country in a different way, right?
Interesting. Patrick, is it fear or, you know, limited political alternatives, or what is it? Why do you think Ugandans love voting for Museveni and might even vote for him?
Um, I would start by saying Ugandans are not cowards. Ugandans are the most kind people I have come across, and they are definitely the most proactive people that I have come across, who are very brave to confront the issues in their communities, very brave to participate in politics. Ugandans are not cowards in any way. I think Ugandans are really, really brave people. When you look at what Uganda has faced as a country over the years to where it is now, it's unthinkable for someone to say Ugandans are cowards, because it only takes brave people to get to the stage of where Uganda is right now. And so I would think that because Kenyans behave a certain way to certain issues, doesn't necessarily mean everyone else should behave that way. Because Kenya is Kenya, Uganda is Uganda. These are two different countries, two different communities, very different contexts. And definitely, these people socially behave differently, and certainly
Yeah.
politically and
Mm-hmm.
even economically, they behave differently. So I wouldn't agree with the assessment that Ugandans are cowards. If
Oh, and
anything,
just to clarify, I didn't say it was a Ugandan. Yeah.
no, uh,
Mm-hmm.
I think that because the comparison is being
Mm-hmm.
made in
Yeah.
relation to Kenyans,
Yes, yes.
right?
Makes
Right.
sense. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But the point is that it doesn't matter, right? Because Ugandans are always going to approach their own issues in a way that is most unique to their own context. Yeah. And the same can be said about Kenyans. Kenyans are always going to approach political, social, and economic issues from a point that is most convenient or maybe unique or most suitable to their own context. Which is why I would say that I totally disagree with the assessment that Ugandans are cowards just because maybe they are not going around burning government buildings or stuff like that. I think that is an extreme comparison to make. But now,
Mm-hmm.
um, coming to your question, I would think that are Ugandans voting Museveni because they love him, or are they voting for Museveni out of fear? I think, first of all, something I need to make clear is this: there is no one answer to that question. And certainly, that answer is not with us who are currently sitting here. If there is anyone that has the answer to this question, are the Ugandans that vote every election cycle, are the Ugandans that every election cycle are brutalized, are the Ugandans that every election cycle are arrested, are the Ugandans that every election cycle show up from morning to evening to vote. The Ugandans that come to those meetings and they shape the conversation or decision making or the agenda for the government. I think those are the people who have the right answer to this question. Definitely not us. But one would say, from an outsider perspective, and say that Ugandans definitely do have reasons to either vote Museveni that either close to what we have read or not at all. Like, for example, because for me, I've had the opportunity, just like Emma, of living in Uganda for a very long time. And during that time, I've had at least the opportunity to be able to speak to Ugandans about politics. Younger Ugandans, older Ugandans, Ugandans in rural settings, and then Ugandans in urban settings. But I think from my conversations with some Ugandans about, politics and Museveni and the opposition leaders, something I have noticed is that some of the people really vote for Museveni genuinely because they love Museveni or appreciate the stability that he has brought to the country over the years. And definitely one thing I've noticed is that the reasons vary a lot for voting
Mhm.
Museveni
Mhm.
as you talk to either older people or younger people or those who are in rural or urban settings. For example, Koboko is a relatively, I would say, small town. I don't know, it wouldn't go into rural, it wouldn't go, but it's relatively small. And I think my conversation with the people in Koboko shows that, especially the older people, some of them say the reason they vote for Museveni is because the violence and displacement and loss of property that they have experienced during the time of the civil wars is something that they never want to see again. And for them, they believe the person who has demonstrated the ability to deliver peace and stability for the country is Museveni. And so some of them vote him for that reason. Even when they hate him as a person, they still strongly believe him and his government are capable of delivering peace because they have proved that over the years. Meanwhile, I think for young people, it's mixed. Some have similar reasons, some not. When you talk to those in urban centers and rural areas, definitely they have different reasons as to why. But I think one other reason that really kept surfacing is also how uh, the opposition in Uganda appears fragmented and weak to some
Mhm.
extent.
Mhm.
You see, like when you actually go on the ground in Uganda and not just Kampala, to the to deep to the villages, you will notice that NRM, which is the ruling party, is deeply rooted even in the most remotest villages. They have structures there. Now, when you compare that to other parties, you will see the gap because some of these parties, they are just in urban centers and that is it. And in some elections, they even don't have people that run for political offices in certain areas. So I think when you try to look at it from that structural perspective of how parties are organized and rooted within communities, you will see the reason why maybe NRM has a huge advantage and favor, maybe in terms of being able to mobilize voters or being able to reach voters more effectively with their message as compared to maybe opposition leaders who only maybe what come once for a rally and that is it, they are gone. But I think having structures rooted in the community allows for the mobilization and messaging to be ongoing even after, for example, a rally. So I guess, like, these are some of the advantages that I guess have allowed Uganda, and in particular President Museveni and his ruling party, to enjoy um, popularity in the country, and winning elections and stuff like that. But of course, these are very highly debatable issues.
Wow. I think from what I've gathered, it looks like the opposition does not have a very great strategy and also good political muscle in comparison to the NRM party. And there's a lot of stuff. Okay, you go ahead.
And maybe something I would add, by the way, is I don't know if you've noticed this, but actually Uganda has probably more parties, political parties in East Africa than any other country, I think.
Interesting.
Probably even more than Kenya.
Oh
And
wow.
these parties, every election cycle, are active. And something that don't get mentioned often is these very political parties receive funding from government, including NRM and the opposition party of Bobby Wine. They all
Interesting.
receive funding from government
Mm-hmm.
to conduct their activities. But this is rarely mentioned or talked about.
Oh wow.
These parties just enjoy that comfortable bit of the government. They keep that one aside and they just keep, amplifying whatever little things that maybe might be going wrong or stuff like that.
Yeah. I think there's, if I'm not wrong, I've heard Emmanuel, like it could be on his podcast. He's mentioned that for the opposition of Uganda to succeed, they would probably have to consolidate, come together the way we conduct elections in Kenya. Like in the last election, whatever. 2022, like a lot of parties came together to form something like a coalition, Azimio, UDA, Kenya Kwanza, and stuff like that. Is that something you said in your podcast, Emmanuel?
Yeah, I did say that. And just like Patrick has said, I think over the years, the national resistance movement has really, really built very, very strong structures that are deeply rooted in the grassroots. And I think that is one biggest asset that Museveni has in his favor, and he'll always continue to have. I mean, most of the political parties that exist in Uganda are ones that have just emerged recently, and they really don't have these strong structures like NRM. And a way where I feel the opposition can counter that challenge is by coming together. That would be the best thing that they would do, because just like Patrick said, at some point I lived in Uganda, in one of the most remotest areas, and in that area during the 2021 elections, I mean, you could easily see that it is only the NRM that is known to the people, and this is because of the many years that the NRM has been in power, and because of that, I think it has really taken down the structures up to the very lowest level, and the opposition could only do that when they come together, bring their minds together, and they become as well popular. But I think right now the opposition is so much fragmented. It's so much divided. There are those who believe that they can do things by their own, and you can see that it's impossible right now. There's no way that the opposition, a single political party, can go into an election with Museveni being a flag bearer for the NRM and they can win Museveni easily. No, it's not going to happen. And just like I gave a comparison in my other video with Kenya, you
Mm-hmm.
see that in Kenya, what these parties do is that when the country is getting towards an elections, political parties get into political coalitions, they look at their interests. What do we want as a political party? What is our interest? And you find that political parties that have similar interests, they gang together, they group together and form political coalitions, and they go into one elections in that manner. I think that is what I feel the opposition needs to do in case they want to defeat Museveni. But the challenge here is also that even the other opposition political parties that are already in bed with Museveni, that are already working in a working relationship with Museveni, and that even posed a very big challenge again for those ones who are looking to take over power from Museveni. For instance, we have the DP, the Democratic Party, that has been in existence for quite long, and DP had an influence in in the northern parts of Uganda, but of recent the DP is in a very, very good working relationship with President Museveni. They even had one of their party leader appointed as a Minister of Justice, that is Chairman Mao. And also the FDC that before the NUP came into existence used to be one of the most popular opposition political party in the country. Again, is no more. The party is divided. It has split into two. Now we have the PFF that is being led by a section of the former FDC members, and we have the FDC mainstream, which is also seems to be in support of Museveni taking over presidency. So I mean, these are all challenges that the opposition is facing, and I feel the only thing they need to do is they need to come together and agree and front one solid political candidate that can be supported by all political parties that call themselves the opposition. And I
Mhm.
think in that way they can muster up with Museveni. But I don't see a possibility of the opposition winning over Museveni. And when we have more than seven candidates on the ballot and they say they want to take out, first of all, they are going to divide the votes. Museveni always has his support base. Museveni has his base where no matter what, these people are going to vote for him. He has his solid base. And in an instance where he sees so many people wanting to become presidents, aspiring to be president, they are going to only divide votes for the opposition. That's the thing. It's not going to affect Museveni so much, but it's going to affect the opposition because Museveni always has his support base. He has his people that he's working with them in government that he knows can deliver for him the votes. And that has been done in the previous elections. And when we see opposition political parties fronting different candidates, it's going to work in favor of Museveni. It's definitely going to work in Museveni. So, as I said, that the best way could be the opposition coming together, but I feel it's too late. Most of the opposition political parties have already fronted their candidates. The FDC has fronted their candidate. The NUP has fronted their candidate. The Ant Kenya, which sorry, I don't know why thinking so much about Kenya, but called the Alliance for National Transformation. That is led by the former General Mugisa Muntu, very prominent person, of which they would have made a very prominent change if they come and work together with Bobby Wine. They are going into this election. There's two different presidential candidates: Bobby Wine for NUP and Mugisa Muntu for ANT, uh, which is the Alliance for National Transformation. I think that is definitely going to work in favor of Museveni. As long as we're going to have different presidential candidates fronted by different opposition political party, Museveni is just going to be celebrating, and I feel that it's going to be working in his favor so much. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I think if just maybe echoing what you said, if they could use that strategy, because I remember in 2002, whatever worked in Kenya for Kenyans to get rid of the Moi era was for them to front one candidate, and it was Moi Kibaki at that point, and everybody rallied around Moi Kibaki, and that was the only way we were able to get that particular change, because also Moi had been in power for 24 years. So I guess from what you guys are saying, there's definitely no shortcut for Ugandans. If they really wanted the change in terms of presidency, they would have to rally probably behind maybe one opposition candidate, and then that might happen. And then maybe just to trace back from what we've talked about, in an earlier episode we were shooting today with Emmanuel. You are not here, Patrick. We were talking about Raila and his legacy and the gaps he's left in the context of even opposition leadership and what he represented in the Kenyan politics, which could also be similar to what Museveni stands for in the context of Uganda. He's been in power from 1986. That's a very long time. And with the passing of Raila, there seems to be sort of like a vacuum. Uh, if we continue with sort of maybe now for Ugandans, the fact that they have had Museveni for the longest, if something happened to Museveni, or maybe he becomes incapacitated, don't you think that the stability that Ugandans have enjoyed for the longest would probably be shaken? Or what would happen to Uganda if something like this happened to them? Would there be a vacuum, or do you think that Museveni has also done a better job of probably grooming somebody, even if not in the opposition? Patrick.
Well, I think I would say that when you look at the political sphere of Uganda, you will notice that Uganda has a lot of very strong and prominent politicians who are capable of leading the country. So many of them, whether it being Norbert Mao, whether it being Mugisha Muntu, whether it being Kiza, Besije, and so many others. Uganda has a lot of competent and capable people that are capable of leading the country. And I think that in an event that for some reason the the position of the president has fallen vacant, I think the constitution of Uganda provides a clear procedures on how such a position can be filled. And so I think most likely that is what will be followed, the constitution. Yeah. And depending on how that happens, hopefully that doesn't happen. We don't get to a situation like that. But these are things that you can't avoid. But I think in case it happens, I am very confident that Ugandans will follow their constitution and get the most capable person to lead the country. Whether it being the vice president of Uganda stepping up to become the president or the prime minister, so many alternatives are possible that can be implemented. So it's up to Ugandans to decide. But I think it's undeniable that the vacuum that Museveni will leave will be huge, because I think he has been, in my opinion, a generational leader. He's been in power for a very long time. So most people who are 30 or over 30, most of these people grew up knowing one leader, and that is
Mhm.
President Museveni. So
Sure.
he's a very generational leader that has been an inspiration to so many and has inspired so many also to get into politics, including Bobby Wine, who was,
Mhm.
I think, at that time when he came into office, when
Mhm.
President came into office, as if Bobby Wine was 8 years or
I
10
think
years.
7 years
Oh
like that.
wow.
7 years around there, yeah. So
Interesting.
literally all the
Uh-huh.
success
Uh-huh.
and everything that Bobby Wine has achieved can be credited to the efforts of Museveni in stabilizing the country. And I think there's so many capable people that have grown and really achieved so much um, skills and competencies to be able to lead the country, whether it being those directly mentored by him or those indirectly inspired by his efforts, like Bobby Wine.
Interesting. I like the way you've mentioned the Ugandan constitution. Maybe instead of Emmanuel answering the same question, he could probably tell us what he thinks about the amendments that have been done to the constitution a couple of times to remove presidential term limits, age limits. What impact has that had on public trust in constitutionalism and democracy in Uganda?
Um, um, yeah, I just like to I don't know what maybe Parega said before I answer your question. Like when we received the news about the death of the former prime minister of Kenya, and some people were writing it on social media that had it been that Raila was elected in the 2022 election as the president of Kenya, and with his death today, we would be having Mata Karua as sworn in as the president with his death. I mean, she should have taken over from Raila because of the death, and that tells us clearly, and that is because the constitution of Kenya says so. So just like Patrick said, if anything happens in Uganda, God forbid, maybe with Museveni, then we would be following the same maybe um what the constitution says about replacing a leader at such a moment. But I think Uganda, there's no shortage of leaders who are capable of leading the country. We have so many people within the NRM party and
Mm-hmm.
even outside the NRM
Mm-hmm.
in opposition, and even others who are now out of politics, are not even in politics. They are very capable. But then regarding the changes that in the constitution several times by the Ugandan maybe president. So many people, to me, I think uh, there is no clear proof to me that uh, it was Museveni who really did that, because most of the time, when the role of legislatures in the parliament is that sometimes people have their private sponsor member, the private member bill that is sponsored by an individual member of parliament, and they go and debate about it. Maybe someone just has an interest, I would say, just like what is happening. There's debating going around Kenya that a certain member of parliament is sponsoring a motion that seeks to extend the term limits to 7 years from the current 5 years in Kenya. So some of these things are being sponsored by individuals, and maybe because people feel that it's a good motion and they get support from the state. But when we look at the constitutional amendment right from 1995, when they changed the term limit, and then to 2017 when they changed the age limit, and so many people believe that this was sponsored by Museveni because it was just in his favor. When the term limit were removed, it gave Museveni the luxury to contest, to get into the elections without any limit. The only limit by that time that was left was the age now, that he could run for presidency as many times as he want. But when he reached the age of 75, that is when he becomes unqualified to run. But then again, in 2017, they took away that law, that article in the constitution. I think it was 102 article in the Ugandan constitution. So when they took that out, when they amended it, it gave him the luxury to run for the presidency again. And to so many people, I think they they look at that like as his weakness. I don't know if it's seen as a weakness, but as a way of not trusting Museveni. And then they just look at him like, if we give him the opportunity to maybe get into, he's again going to change this law. So many people have seen him as a dictator in that manner, because they feel
Mm-hmm.
that he dictates on what needs to be done on the constitution that favors him. Just like what happened in 1995, it favored him. The one that happened in 2017, it favored him. So many Ugandans look at him at that lenses as being a dictator. And yeah, but to me, really, there's no clear proof that he supported that, right? Could be members of parliament who just sponsored it. And the parliament, in real sense, in a real democracy, and the executive, they operate differently. The legislature has a very different role, which is in making laws of the country, and the executive has a very different role. But they can work together at some point. So that's my view about that.
And what do you think, Patrick, about the amendments?
Well, I agree with a lot of what Emma has said, and even I would add that how the parliament of Uganda operates and how the executive of Uganda operate is similar to maybe most countries. There is, of course, just like in Kenya, the job of the legislature in Uganda is as well to make laws. So it's just the same thing. I think for me, when it comes to the removal of the age limits and term limits, whereas there is a conspiracy, the conspiracy that Emma has mentioned, that maybe President Museveni sponsored the bills that basically allowed for the presidential term limit and age limit to be removed. But in my opinion, I would think whether that is true or not, the parliamentarians are equally responsible and share in that blame. Because even if you sponsor a bill, if the parliamentarians do not vote on it, nothing happens.
Right.
But you know what happened? They overwhelmingly voted
Voted.
for the removal of the term limits and the age limits. And honestly, so they share as much blame
Mm-hmm.
as the president,
Mm-hmm.
if it is true that he sponsored it. But I think for me, it just goes to show how much damage the parliament can cause if they have their own agendas that are maybe a little bit really different from that of the people that have sent them to parliament. And and maybe I would even add and say that an example like this goes to show how we really need to be very careful with who we vote as a member of parliament.
That's true.
We have to be very careful because at the end of the day, they get to make such really important and consequential decisions, such as these ones. And when it comes to the term limit and the age limit being removed, I know people have a fixation to look at Museveni. No, look beyond Museveni. Because Museveni is as human as you and me. And so he's going. So when you look at it, it benefits anyone that comes to power. Doesn't matter who, including even Bobby Wine. Should he get to become the president of Uganda, or Besigye, should he get to become the president of Uganda? It's like a thing that gets to benefit whoever comes next as the president beyond Museveni. Now, is that something that maybe we would want? Maybe we need to have conversation about that. But again, who are we to decide or to say we need to have conversation? Because it should be the Ugandans to say we do not want this. But right now, it feels like Ugandans are like, you know what? We sent you to represent us, and
Yeah.
you chose that is what is best for us.
Mm-hmm.
So be it.
Mm-hmm.
So even for us outside here, I'll be like, for me, I'm like, okay, if it works for you, how is it my in my place to tell you that it should be removed? That's their business.
Right.
So it's the
Right.
business of Ugandans to decide, in my
Right.
opinion. But
Yeah, I
I
think
would,
yeah, go
yeah,
go go on. Go,
I would think also that these changes, whether implemented by the president or influenced by the president, or solely a parliamentary initiative by the parliamentarians, I would think that it really goes to show a lot how sometimes constitutional changes can be made when when if there are terms within the constitution or provisions within the constitution that inconvenience power or that inconvenience those in power. And so people get to do that. such that they can get some luxury. As in essence, what happens is that the ceiling gets moved a little bit up, but not for everyone, right? Just for those few who are in power. There's this book called Animal Farm by George Orwell. I don't know if some of you have read it.
Yeah,
There's a
I read
quote,
that book.
yes, there's a saying in that book that says, all animals are equal, but some are more equal
Equal than
than
others.
others.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, like when you see some of these changes being made, it's more like that analogy at play, but at a such high level. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah. I think I really like what Patrick brought in, that sometimes we really don't have to blame the president for some of the decisions that are made in his favor, because
Mm-hmm.
we as the people, we identify people in our constituencies that we send them to parliament to make laws for us, right? and and the blame, I think, should rest entirely, I mean, on the parliamentarians that we choose, but also us as the voters as well, right? Because if we vote for people that goes to parliament and make decisions that are not in our favor, then we should blame ourselves that maybe we are not in the right state of mind to identify a leader who can act as our representative in the parliament. So if we send people that are not going to, then we must ask you what came over us that we were not able to identify this person as a right, as the rightful person, and we do have laws in our, the constitutions have laws that dictates that the parliament or the legislature should operate independently. But why is it that even these members of the legislature, after knowing that, are still able to be bribed or to be maybe taken advantage of by the president? I think this entirely rests on the presidency, the legislature, but as the voters as well, you know. And sometimes these issues to do with the changes, as Patrick has said, they benefits not only the president but even those who will come after him, right? Those who they will also have the chance to do that. But the most important thing is that the age limit, I think one thing that people might have noticed is that people think the age limit only opens a way for someone above 75 to get into the ballot, but also it's becoming a culture world, I mean, all over the world, that young people are agitating for change. So by eliminating that age limit opens a way for these young people who should have been restricted to be 35 years to become presidency. That age limit, the time it was erased, it opened more ways for those even below 35 to contest or to get into the presidency as well. And just like what you have seen in the previous election, we had a guy in the name of John Katumba who actually ran for president. Katumba Oye Oye, like that guy, right? So, whereas I think we shouldn't just look at it in the way of opening ways for Museveni, but also opening ways for, there could be some people who are more prominent, but they are under the age of 35. So by these, I think more ways are open for them now. They are given the platform to come and display their ability, so people can notice them and actually tell them, go for it, go for the presidency. So it works in favor of everyone. And if we debate that it is a blame, it's something that is, but then we should put that blame entirely as well, or equally, on us as the voters, or the Ugandan voters in this case.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, I like what you guys have talked about, especially in the context of voters. We all have a role to play, or even the Ugandan people have a role to play. And in particular, you talked about people agitating for change. I kind of feel like, in my assessment from this conversation we are having, I feel like in Kenya, in East Africa, in Africa, and even all over around the world right now, there's been a way politics has run, there's been a way people have been led, but there's this sort of awakening that has been happening around the world, which is why you would see youth in Malaysia or maybe in Nepal wake up and protest, and they're like, we don't want this, we don't want this type of government, we don't want to be led like this. And I feel like maybe even for Uganda, It's maybe probably it's just not the right time, but probably a time will come when they'll experience their own, in their own context, their own particular political awakening that would probably lead to some level of change, depending on what the change looks like for them, or what they might want. Because right now I feel like there's a lot of influence, there's social media, we keep seeing a lot of things, and I feel like even with the Gen Z uprising last year in Kenya, I kind of feel like it kind of changed a bit of things out here. Maybe young people realize that they have power, they can agitate for change in their own countries, and some have even gone to the extent of, uh, throwing out their governments and bringing in new governments, and looking and advocating for the change they want and the type of leadership they want. So maybe it's just a matter of time.
Definitely.
So,
Uh, if
uh-huh.
if I could say something, uh, just picking up from what you've said, I think one thing I can say is that it it's definitely not that Ugandans are waiting for some form of political awakening, because I do think that Ugandans are politically awakened when you look at how engaged they are in their politics, whether it being online or in person. Ugandans are definitely awake. They know what is going on. They participate actively. When you look at rallies, um, that political leaders are currently conducting as part of the election campaigns and stuff like that, you see massive number of people, different demographic, young people, older, middle-age, all attending, right? And even children. So I think that really cannot happen without that kind of awareness, or being politically awake about what is going on in the country. I think Ugandans do understand and appreciate the importance of their participation in their politics. I uh, I would think though that what might be needed maybe would be uh, more civic education, just to see to it that people uh, are very informed when it comes to making those decisions. They are voting solely based on maybe the agenda that a candidate has presented before
Mhm.
them, rather than maybe who they know, or stuff like that. I think like that is a super important thing. But I would also think that Ugandans definitely want change, right? They have always wanted change. Right now, they want to change. Tomorrow, Ugandans still will want to change. This is simply because change means different things to Ugandans. Ch- Uh, Maybe, for example, if someone is looking at it from an outsider perspective, for you, will be like, oh no, the change they're waiting for is change of leadership or the
Yes.
president.
Mhm.
Well,
Mhm.
that could be correct and that could be wrong at the same time, depending on which Ugandan you speak to. So, and it could be that the change they are waiting for is change around jobs, change around access to better health infrastructures, change around access to better services, whether it being hospital or what and stuff like that. So the change means different things, and it will continue to be different even when we have a new president in Uganda, because Ugandans will always want to change, but that change will always keep changing. It will not be the same, the kind of stuff they're asking for.
Interesting.
Great.
And how independent do you think are Uganda's key institutions, e.g., the judiciary, the electoral commission? Because I feel like with Kenya, for example, we've struggled with some of these things before we got to a place where we could say things are a little bit better. How independent do you think those institutions are in Uganda? Emmanuel?
Uh, I think that's a very hard question because I haven't really experienced or haven't seen some of the actions that proofs that are done by these institutions that can tell us exactly whether they are independent or not independent. But when we look at institution like even parliament is a government institution, as they say. But uh, if people claim that the previous amendments introduced in the Ugandan constitution were sponsored by the president, then that posed a question whether these institutions are independent. But also, I mean, for an institution to be independent, it entirely rests on the leadership of that particular institution. You know, and when we're talking about the parliament, we're talking about the leadership of the parliament. We're talking about the speaker of the National Assembly. How independent is this speaker in running proceedings in the parliament? How independent is maybe the judiciary, the chief justice of the government of the country, in delivering verdicts or decisions that so much impact the country, or even the electoral commission, the commissioners that are charged with the responsibility of delivering the results of an election? How independent are they? And as I have seen all these institutions in Uganda, I haven't really engaged so much in an effort to maybe figure out if they are independent or not. Yes, there were claims in the previous elections that um, the elections were rigged, that the elections were rigged, and then that the real election results that were announced by the electoral commissions were actually not the right one. People claim that Bobby won, and but Museveni went with the results at the end of the day. And even the verdict, at some point they filed a petition, but they withdrew the petition. So, I mean, the debate of whether Ugandan institutions are independent or not, I think that will need a very, very deep research and find out, look at these actions that were made, if at all, and all the claims presented by these. Maybe someone is just maybe posing a question. I mean, a claim that these institutions are not independent because they did not work in their favor, right? That could be the
Yeah.
reason why they are doing that. But in real sense, it is independent. I mean, in the last previous election, even in Kenya, we have seen it happen many times that um, the results of the elections after being released, the run up to the elections in most cases, I mean, filed a petition. They went for an appeal and contested the results of the election. But at the end of the day, the judiciary comes out and say that this is the results. This is the right person. So at the end of the day, whether these institutions are independent or not, we are the one who agree that we should have these institutions, and we charge them with the responsibility that if the electoral commission comes up with the results that this candidate is the one who has won the election, we have no choice but to accept it, because in the first place we are the one who established these institutions. That even when the judiciary comes out and say this is a verdict that we have passed regarding this case, we have no option, but we have to agree, because we established this institution and we have actually given them the mandate. We have given them the authority to deliver verdicts, to deliver results in our place, right? As a country. So I think this is an issue that maybe for me as an outsider to come up with an answer to whether these institutions are independent or no. I think this needs me to engage with a lot of research and find out what are the qualifications, or what qualifies this institution to be regarded as independent or not independent. But as I said, whether they are independent or no, in the first place, we establish them. So we have to live with the results that come. They say, as you prepare the bed, you must be ready to lie on it. So we are the one who established them. So we must be ready as well to come up. I mean, to agree or to come into terms with every verdict and results that they're going to come up with. Right.
Mhm. Interesting. Patrick, how independent do you think?
No, honestly, personally, I really don't think um, I know enough to be able to deliver a verdict on whether these institutions are independent or not. But one thing I have noticed, at least online, is that some people who have, in a very long time, been critics of these organs of government, such as, for example, the judiciary. I think this is probably one of the organs in Uganda that has really been dragged in public a lot, online and offline. But something I've noticed is that some of the people who have been long-time critics of these institutions have also become people who speak for these institutions because now these institutions work in their favor. There's a clip I came across online where someone was saying corruption is only bad if it is someone else doing it. Corruption is not bad if I am the one doing it and benefiting from it. I will defend corruption and I will defend it. And this was someone saying online.
Interesting. Uh-huh.
So for me, I think it's really one of those things that I don't
Uh-huh.
know. Is it independent? Is it not independent? Because
Yeah.
what you see is
Mhm.
people who in the past these institutions worked against them. Naturally, you get angry, frustrated, and you take it against these institutions. And then all of a sudden, they work in your favor. Or like, oh shoot, it's fantastic. And then you start praising them all of a sudden.
Yeah, I see your
So
point.
I don't know.
Interesting. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Honestly, yeah.
Yeah.
From an outsider perspective, you might not get the best glimpse of, whether how fair or how best it works for a Ugandan. But you guys have lived in Uganda. You've interacted with Ugandans. You might know a little bit about this next question. Do you think like Ugandans are genuinely interested and desire political change? And if so, what barriers prevent that change from becoming a reality for them? Emmanuel.
Yeah, I think I would refer back to what Patrick has said, that uh, change to so many Ugandans, I mean, like, could mean differently, and it's good that you specify about political change. So I think, of course, there are many Ugandans who would agree that they need a political change. Wouldn't it be maybe a change in the leadership, but a change in some of the ideas that this leadership should maybe start to have? Uganda could have the same leader as President Museveni, but when they can have some changes in how the politics of the country should be run. I mean, it doesn't matter, it cut across if you're in the opposition or in the government. I mean, everyone wants a country where you have the freedom to speak up your mind. You have
Mhm,
access to, I mean, you have freedom to associate with whoever you want. It doesn't matter if you are in the government or in the opposition. And I feel people need that change. It not only, they really desire that change, and it's not only the young people, but even the elderly as well. They just want a country where um, they can be seen as uh, at the center of its decision making, right? So it does not necessarily mean a change of leadership, but it's just a change of ideas and ideals, like what this leadership stands for. And I think change is always inevitable, and people would always want change, and change will never stop. You can have a change today, the next day, and change actually, it's determined by so many factors, and time is one of them. And it could be also influenced by other factors, external, internal factors. So I feel at the moment Ugandans are uh, uh, they are contented with some of the things that the regime has done, but they feel a little that there is need for more to be done. Right? There is more for um, an inclusive a country where uh, they can have like everyone's. opinions listened to. I think that is the change that other Ugandans need, and that change is mainly with the young people, because they know what their future holds. They know that much of what the country will have is going to be in their benefit, and that's what they really want right now. Majority of Ugandans who need change, these are the young Ugandans who they look at their future beyond just current leaders, right? These are the only people who are agitating for change, and I feel they are desperate for it right now. But it doesn't. They can have that change with Museveni as their president as well, as long as there is a goodwill. There is goodwill being portrayed by the president Museveni to do that. So they can have this regardless of who is their president. They could have a new president, Bob Wine, but they can also agitate for change. Bob Wine might come with different ideas that is contradictory to what the Ugandan people need. So if he does that, then definitely they can as well call for change. So change is something that will never come to stop. It will never stop. It will always be there, regardless who is the president. So I think Ugandans need that change, and they always need it. When things are bad in the country, they always need change, and I think that will happen, not just for today, but even when they have a new political dispensation or new leadership in the country. Change will always be there, right?
Nice. Patrick.
I think Emma has said it very eloquently. From high school, and probably Emma has learned this. We've always been told in class that there is only one thing that is constant in this life, and that is change. Change will change you even if you do not want to change. And that's how constant change is. And so I would think that, just like Emma has said it so nicely, Ugandans have always wanted change, and they still are demanding for change, and they will always demand for change. And again, this means different things. Change means different things for different categories of Ugandans. But I would think that even when you're speaking about political change, just like Emma said it really nicely, it goes beyond change of who is the president to maybe the systems and the structures that are in place that may be disadvantaging some people or groups of people, or are marginalizing some people or groups of people, and that need to be improved. Uh, and but also I would think that some of these changes are really part and parcel of economic changes. In fact, I think a lot of them are actually informed by economic changes. Like they play a huge role in informing some of the political changes that end up happening. I would think that if really things go to really bad, like extremely bad economically in Uganda, you will be surprised what Ugandans will do. There's nothing that can push you to your limits than that economic hardship that pushes you to a corner. And so I think that maybe things are not as bad as maybe they seem. But I would also think that when it comes to change, I think the opposition definitely need to present a more stronger to present themselves as a strong alternative to Museveni and his government. They need to do that maybe better, because I think maybe at the moment the people really don't see the opposition as a very strong alternative to Museveni. Because I was having some conversations with some young people in Koboko and in Kampala about what they thought about Bobby Wine. And this was not recent. This was in 2020. I think probably around December there. It was the height of the
Mhm. 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 Mhm.
campaign.
Mhm. 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 Mhm.
There was so much going on. But I was asking if some of them were going to vote for Bobby Wine, since he was the hottest thing. But I was so surprised that some of them really said, "No, I'm not going to vote for him." And I asked why. But some of them were like, "This guy, the only thing that he has communicated clearly to us is that he wants to remove Museveni
Right.
in a very clear slogan, which is Museveni must go." But he
Mhm.
hasn't told us what
What
next
next?
after
Mhm.
Museveni.
Mhm.
And so for that person, that was like the most defining thing for him. And so for him, he thought, unless that is communicated clearly, what next after Museveni, he still doesn't see Bobby Wine as a presidential candidate, because all he does is just, we want this guy to go, but doesn't give a very strong political and economic agenda for the country and how he's going to execute that agenda.
Interesting.
And I think that is probably also something that has worked maybe in favor of Museveni and not in favor of Bobby Wine. But I think looking at some of the recent messaging and the communication and even positionality, how the opposition has positioned themselves, especially Bobby Wine, looking at their manifesto and so forth, I think they have improved significantly from just Museveni must go to now something bigger than that.
Mhm.
And I think that is what Ugandans want to see. And maybe this time,
Mhm.
yeah, they manage to convince Ugandans that we are the right people to bring
I
in the new Uganda.
Yeah, I think I as well had the privilege to go through the manifesto of the NUP, which is was titled "A New Uganda Now," and it was really a very appealing manifesto that you could easily see that is what a country needs to have. But the one thing that I guess the opposition is left with is one they really have to work on putting down those structures up to the grassroots level. That is one thing. You could have one of the best structure, I mean, the best manifesto in the world, but if you don't take this manifesto down to the roots and tell the people that this is actually what we stand for, then people will never know about what you're standing for. So I think they really have to do on that. They need to work on that very well. They need to establish the structure at least in every village. They need to have even a candidate like standing even in the LC1 position, which is very important. The grassroots levels are the ones that are very important. Majority of the opposition in Uganda, they're only centralized. They are based mainly in the densely populated area, and that is in the cities. Because this is I think it's Bobi Wine support base in mainly the Kampala,
Have we
Wakiso
lost
regions. Like
Emmanuel?
this
Can you
is
still
where
hear him?
the opposition is. And they
No,
need to develop
I
really,
can't
really,
hear him.
very good
Looks like
structures
we've lost
down
Emma.
down to the
Ah,
grassroots.
you could pause it.
Okay.
So, as Uganda heads towards the 2026 election, I saw a clip online of him saying he was asking people from Uganda to just vote him one last time. This will be the last round for him, or according to him. Do you guys think he's going to win? Mhm. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Patrick, do you think he will win?
Well, I think President Museveni has a higher chance of winning the 2026 elections. Um, First, because honestly, like his party has really very deep structural presence or grassroots presence, and I think that is a big advantage. But I also understand that when it comes to the opposition, I think this particular election cycle is different because now they can all go out and pull in as massive crowds as they can without any constraints from either the government or the law enforcement agencies, because in 2020 it was an issue of COVID-19. And so pulling in a lot of crowds like Bobby Wine was doing, it was clearly breaking the law. And so it brought in a lot of issues and stuff like that. Even though some people, defended him and saying, but laws are laws, and it kind of affected his political campaigns a little bit. But I think now it's different. He can go out and pull as many people as possible, and Museveni can do the same, and any other person who is contesting can do the same. So I would think that really, especially the two parties, NUP and NRM, chances are very high that one of the party bearers might end up becoming the president of Uganda in 2026. Although I would still place my bet on President Museveni if I
Uh-huh.
were betting.
I actually wanted to ask if you did place a bet. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, and honestly, it's very interesting because again, for me, I see that possibility happening, right? He is very popular. He might not be the most capable person, but he is
Mm-hmm.
very popular.
Okay.
And things like with elections, sometimes you don't need to be the most capable person to win. People don't care. As long as they want you to be the president, they will vote for you, you know? So chances are high that, yeah, for sure, he could win the election. But I also would think that, honestly, when we are talking about voter coercion, what exactly are we talking about? Because we've not seen government agencies or maybe NRM agencies going door to door with a gun to your head and saying, vote President
What about
Museveni or
bribing?
you're gone. Yes. We've not seen any of that. So
Mm-hmm.
it's one of those things that is debatable. Is it really voter coercion? What is it? We can't tell.
What
And
about
and
bribes?
your pardon?
What about bribes?
I mean, again, this because when you look at, for example, things like bribes, would you say that is coercion? A bribe's coercion? Because coercion, you're looking at use of force.
Okay.
Bribes is inducement.
Mm.
You
Like
induce people.
manipulation. Mm.
Yes, it's a form of manipulation. It's not really coercion because there is no use of force. You're using resources. But again, uh, that definitely maybe does happen. But who is to say that it is only happening within the ruling party? I don't know. So only those who have really proper details can be able to tell. Because I would think that if you're talking about bribing people, anyone is capable of bribing anyone. It's not just limited to the president or the ruling party or anyone. Anyone, including those in the opposition, are capable of bribing and are capable of receiving bribes. In fact, I would even say there was one member of NUP who received a form of payment. Was it in 2024 or 2023? That I think would amount maybe to something like a bribe, although it was legitimately decided in parliament as a payment for that person. But payment that you are the one allocating to yourself, you're the one sitting in the approval committee to
Oh, wow.
approve for yourself your own payment. But when it comes to bribing, anyone is capable of bribing or receiving bribe. So I would think that when we talk about voter coercion is really a very abstract idea that we really don't know how impactful or how much impact is having, or even how much does it exist on the ground. It's like one of those things that. Mm.
So it's more mental. Interesting. Wow. Any last thoughts on this conversation as we wind up? Patrick, we could start with you.
Ah, I think for me, honestly, the the Ugandan politics is very interesting. It gives one the interest to want to actually follow politics every day. Al- Although it has it is a chaos. It's more dramatic, like the U.S. elections and the U.S. politics. It's so dramatic that every time you wake up, you want to see what is new. And for the US, it never disappoints. There's always drama. but,
That's
but
true.
yeah, but I think apart from that, one thing I see is that this 2026 election is going to be a very, decisive election for Uganda in so many ways. It's either um, going to be Museveni, and then after that, we see what comes after him, or it's going to be an entirely new person coming on board as the president. Could be Bobby Wine, could be someone else. Uh, but regardless, I think for me, my hope is that whatever happens, the peace and the stability and the law and order that Uganda has enjoyed for decades should continue, irrespective of who comes to be the president. Doesn't matter. That should continue because a lot of things depend on that. The reason why is Uganda has grown so much, whether it being economic wise, infrastructure wise, population wise, the population is so big right now. Investments wise, is because of the stability that the country has been able to provide. That investors and people are willing to put in their resources, knowing they will be able to make them back or stuff like that. But I think if someone else comes and it doesn't maintain that environment, it's going to be chaos. And honestly, that would be unfortunate. I think for me, really, irrespective of what the results of the election ends up being, the peace and stability and security and the order should continue to prevail in Uganda. But I also think that whoever comes on board, be it as the president or a member of parliament, it's really super important that we keep building up institutions like, for example, the constitution, building up the constitution so it is strong that it's able to protect those rights for us and even for those who will come after us. Because honestly speaking, personally, I see a constitution as a promise that the country has made to its citizens. We will protect you. You have the right to speak up. You have the right to hold us accountable. You have the right to education. Like, it's a huge promise. You have the right to access jobs and so forth. And if you have people who come in and keep changing this without necessarily looking at the bigger picture of how us, whom the promise is being made to, are going to be impacted by this, I think it's going to be disastrous for the local people, the ordinary people. But also, it gets people to stop believing in that promise. And that's where carnage and the other stuff could come in. So I think it's very important that we continue to build up and strengthen institutions that allow for our rights to flourish, for our democracy to flourish, um, and to get to politics that is based on ideology rather than sectarianism. Which is, I think, that is probably one idea that I really love that is propagated by Museveni always, that we need to move beyond sectarian politics, politics of division, and move beyond that to now discussing ideology. Let it be your ideology against mine. If yours win this election, maybe mine will win the next one. But irrespective of that, we can disagree. We can do what, but let it be about the ideology, not maybe where I come from or the community I come from.
Interesting. Emmanuel, last thoughts? Wow. Patrick, you have something else?
No, I just wanted to add to what Emma said and say that honestly, when voting for our MPs and leaders in this coming election cycle, it's really important that we focus on the uh, agenda that these people have for us and maybe our own place. That is very important rather than maybe focusing on just the individual or maybe uh, their their background, because there are a lot of cases I've seen where people have voted just because maybe they have they call it legacy. They have maybe their parents or grandparents were in government and they did great job, and so they get voted really. Yeah, legacy politicians. I think we need to move beyond that. We need to move now beyond that to voting people because of the agenda that
Hmm.
they have,
Yeah.
um, and then and then such that we do not have situations where we have very critical decisions being made in parliament without us as the people being consulted, when ideally when there are critical decisions that are about to be made, such as change of a term limit, presidential limit, the people should be consulted. They should come down to us and ask us, is this something we want? But I think if we have people who, like Emma has put it very nicely, politicians who are serving as praise and worship group for the executive, mm,
Hmm.
we end up
Yeah.
getting what we've seen in the country. Yeah.
Hmm. Wow. Thank you, gentlemen. I feel like you have given a really good analysis of the political landscape in Uganda, what the future looks like, and maybe even what their election might look like. I appreciate you taking the time. Yes, and we could say that Uganda's story is one of resilience and power and the constant search for freedom. Whether or not they want change or the change comes sooner, the conversation about leadership and democracy must continue, not just also in Uganda, but across Africa. Thank you for tuning into the Spark It podcast. Don't forget to follow, share, and spark a conversation that matters. Until next time, I'm your host, Helen Kimaru, and I was joined by Emmanuel Taban from the Concern podcast and my co host, Patrick Abure. Until next time, kwaheri.
Bye.
Yes.